Greetings, I'm the Game Overthinker. This episode ran long, so I don't really have time for a clever opening, so I guess we'll just... You know, video games are pretty fucking great.
They take us to exciting new worlds, challenge us with unique and thrilling stories, teach us important lessons, and give us admirable, one-of-a-kind heroes. And I, for one, am getting really tired of this medium and its supporters constantly being put on the spot. Yes, some games are shit. Yeah, some gamers are too, and it's important to call that out when we see it, and I, for one, always will.
But just because I'm willing to call that kind of nonsense out doesn't mean I don't also get sick of this vibrant, powerful, meaningful art form always feeling like it has to be on the defensive.
Last episode we talked about video game violence, with an emphasis on the need for gamers to let go of our instinctive but largely obsolete shout-down reactions to criticism of game content, on the basis that no one was actually making the hoary old games cause violence argument anymore, and yada yada, go back and watch it if you don't remember, time is money. Anyway, my intent was to spend most of this episode examining the flip side, i.e. my disagreement with a seemingly more nuanced position, namely that extreme content in games along with messages and meanings can affect the individual human psyche and or general societal tone to an extent that it can influence negative behavior even if it doesn't explicitly cause negative behavior, an important distinction.
And while that is a subject that legitimately interests me, I also said this.
Wouldn't you rather finally spread the word about what games can do instead of panicking and tripping over yourself swearing about what they can't do?
And I realized I hadn't been doing a great job following my own advice, that signal boosting the positive can be just as, if not more effective, than dwelling on the minutia of the negative. So I flipped the script. I'm going to front load and abbreviate the message, influence, meaning stuff right here at the beginning so that I can move on to the more important and more positive rebuttal. Because at the end of the day, The Game Overthinker is a show about video games, but it's also a show about positivity and the way forward.
So, to put it concisely, there is no such thing as a work of art or entertainment that does not produce some kind of reaction or effect in those who are exposed to it, because that's just not how the human brain functions. Everything has a message, everything leaves some degree of impression, even if it doesn't intend to, etc. No one with even a rudimentary understanding of the human mind can dispute this.
However,
another thing no one who understands the human mind cannot dispute is that we cannot say for certain what an impression or reaction to a given experience will be. A person can walk through a war zone and be so moved by the horror and carnage around them that they swear to devote their entire lives to ending all war, while another person can walk through that same war zone and be so moved that they decide that war is the greatest thing ever and they can't wait to make some themselves.
And there's just no way to tell which is going to be which, certainly not to a degree of certainty that you could use to make policy or even meaningful policy recommendations.
Which means that while gamers do need to learn to accept the right of cultural criticism they disagree with to exist without the need for an overly defensive Zerg rush, certain cultural critics themselves should also be doing a better job of avoiding unnecessary hyperbole that could obscure or even undermine their actual points. After all, there are plenty more valid, interesting, and actually worth highlighting or even speaking directly against aspects to, say, the Doom reboot, the Call of Duty franchise, Far Cry, and so forth beyond your personal taste or distaste regarding their content. And that's the thing, once the conversation goes from concrete ideas and serious issues to I think this is sick versus, well, I think it's awesome, now you're arguing about personal taste, which is wholly subjective argument nobody can really win. Yes, even when both sides are throwing cherry-picked studies at each other.
And so I say again, why continue spinning our wheels in hypothetical discussions about what video games aren't or what they don't cause when there's more merit, fact, and evidence to be found in the good that games do and the things that games are. To paraphrase another complicated figure of recent history,
there is nothing wrong with video games that cannot be cured by what is right with video games.
For example, are there a lot of character designs in gaming that reinforce damaging, unrealistic body images?
Yeah, it's kind of a problem.
On the other hand, the most famous video game hero of all time is an overweight dude with a respectable blue-collar job who looked like he was pushing middle-aged in 1981. And while by no means typical, he's not exactly alone in that. Do some games present, intentionally or not, a deeply problematic or at least bafflingly thoughtless strain of colonialism or Western imperialism in their presentation of other cultures?
Yep.
On the other hand, I honestly think that the omnipresent realization among many gamers in the console golden age that an overwhelming number of their favorite games originated in Japan did tremendous good in broadening the cultural and aesthetic horizons of multiple generations of gamers. And this was especially profound given that in the 80s and 90s, every other part of Western and particularly American pop culture was saturated in incendiary rhetoric, caricaturizing and demonizing the Japanese as a sinister invading horde looking to steal jobs, real estate, and economic futures from good, honest, hard-working Americans. Hey, speaking of xenophobia, do military shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield glorify the unchecked projection of American military might to what many would consider an ugly and propagandistic degree? I'd say yes. But on the other hand, the Metal Gear franchise has spent 3 decades exploring and harshly criticizing themes of militarism and popular culture in a more thoughtful and philosophical way. The Final Fantasy series has built multiple games around characters who are soldiers but come to question the logic and even morality of that vocation, and you can find visual and narrative decisions undercutting the ideal of righteousness through superior firepower in titles as diverse as Spec Ops: The Line, Super Mario Bros., Advance Wars, Cannon Fodder, Fallout, Missile Command, or even Worms. Have those same aforementioned America fuck yeah military shooters sometimes contributed to the xenophobic othering and villainizing of foreign cultures, specifically Islam and the Middle East as of late?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but yeah, it's true, and this shit piles up after a while.
But video game history has also given us Prince of Persia, Arabian Magic, Osman, The Magic of Shahzadeh, Al-Qadim, The Genie's Curse, Shantae, Arabian Fights, The Legend of Oasis, and many other titles that featured settings and stories inspired by Middle Eastern folklore, Islamic art traditions, and featuring Arab, Persian, and South Asian characters. Many of these imperfect, certainly, but a starting point at least. Speaking of which, are too many game protagonists bland, interchangeable white guys? Hell yes, especially recently. But there are also games, entire classic beloved franchises of games in fact, that feature diverse casts of characters from multiple nations, cultures, and creeds not just as a detail, but as a defining element.
You notice that a lot of the more problematic stuff seems to have cropped up in recent generations, while perhaps counterintuitively, the more progressive, helpful stuff seems to be coming from the classic era. Funny how that works out, huh?
Is the most famous female character in gaming most well known as a so-called damsel in distress? Regrettably, yes. But she's also been frequently portrayed as an athlete, an Olympian in fact, and a racer, and a medical professional. And when she has been a playable character in the main series, she's whooped some serious ass, consistently. Is there too much violence overall? Honestly, I don't think there is. I mean, I'd like to see more games where the central mechanic isn't combat, but that's more of a narrative aesthetic thing. But even still, it's hard for me to get worked up about violence so absurd that it's practically a cartoon. The substantive difference between Doom or Mortal Kombat and, say, Splatoon is that in Splatoon, the goofy-ass paint you're splashing around in just for the fun of it comes in more colors than red.
Although, I will say that I'm more troubled now than I was once upon a time by the more politically sketchy violence of the Call of Duty franchise, or the increasingly mean-spirited punching-down humor of the GTA series.
Which brings us to the big one. Is the games industry way too dominated by a single, very problematic genre that increasingly seems to be the source of the cancers eating at the soul of the very media?
You bet your ass. But also not exactly.
Yes, it's true that the overall mass-market public face of video games has never looked less diverse or imaginative. That was then, this is now, yeah, point made. But gaming itself is actually a lot bigger, more vibrant, and more overall diverse than it's ever been. You just have to look beyond the currently bland monochromatic surface. I understand, it can be hard to look at the looming piles of Doritos, Red Bull, Axe body spray, and neocon war propaganda making up the tip, and imagine the rest of the iceberg is in any way worthwhile. I've been as guilty of that as anyone.
Yeah, I admit it.
It's easy to look at a Roman orgy of crass corporate backslapping that is E3, or the shameless shenanigans of certain companies, or the stifling toxicity that engulfs too many gaming communities and want to write the whole damn thing off. But at this point, video games are such a vast, multi-tiered thing that doing so really is like throwing the entirety of sports, from the Olympics to pee-wee hockey to curling to marathons, baseball, football, rugby, cricket, swimming, polo, wrestling, lacrosse, sumo, laser tag, preschool soccer, ultimate frisbee, and dog toys that look like balls under the bus just because FIFA turned out to be a hopelessly corrupt clusterfuck. Video games have a lot of problems. Video games are awesome. The one does not negate the other, but the squeaky wheel shouldn't get all the grease all the damn time. You've got to discipline the dog that pees on the rug, sure, but not to the extent that you forget to reward the dog that just pulled Timmy out of the goddamn well for the 50th time.
Because we have to remember that even though sunlight is the best disinfectant, it's also best for helping the good stuff find its way out of the shadows. I'm the game overthinker, and that's what I want to do.